mean no rules for the President of the United States, that he's bound by no treaty, constitution, law, anything whatever. In short, Richard Nixon's philosophy, mentioned in connection with what he did against me, by the way, at the time, to David Frost, which was, when the president does it, it's not illegal, puts him above the law in a way that actually no British monarch has been above the law since John I with the Magna Carta. It gives him an absolute monarchy character, which I think is the nature of the U.S. presidency right now.
When I saw you at the Museum of Modern Art, you had this photograph of you, John Lennon, Yoko Ono, and Barbara Streisand.
I gave it to Yoko as a memory of the last time I saw her 40 years ago.
And you talked about how Barbara Streisand may well have saved America.
Well, Barbara Streisand offered to do a fundraiser for us in the last month of our trial at a time when we had no money left.
You were being charged with treason for
practically being charged with
Pentagon
115 years, possibly life sentence, pretty much a life sentence. With good behavior, I'd have gotten out a couple of years ago if I had good behavior. And we were really prepared to stop calling witnesses and to basically go into final argument, just essentially for economic reasons.
Because you'd run out of money.
We'd run out of money. And very expensive process. And she offered a fundraiser, which raised a lot of money for that time by auctioning off songs, actually, for the Beatles appeared for. Had she not done that, and had the trial ended on a day, by the way, when President Nixon, through John Ehrlichman, was offering my judge, Matthew Byrne, the head of the FBI.
Offering to make Matthew Byrne the
head of the FBI. Head of the FBI. His
judge.
Lifelong ambition, as it so happened, clearly contingent on a suitable ending to my trial. So I think I was pretty well fated to be found guilty had that not been leaked to the public. And he dismissed that as a charge for dismissing the trial. He said it hadn't affected him, that offer. But many other crimes, such as the warrantless wiretapping and the attempt to assault me, did lead to that. Only because the trial was kept going for another month. It was during that month that John Dean's acknowledgement to the prosecutors about the White House efforts to silence me, to blackmail me, to go into my doctor's office, warrantless wiretapping, to assault me, use the CIA against me, which at that time was illegal. All of these things now being legal, by the way, but at the time being illegal, subjected him to impeachment in hearings and led to his resignation. Without that, he would have stayed in office and the war would have continued for at least another couple of years. So that initiative of people giving support to a man that the administration was trying to make a pariah, just as they are making that effort with Julian Assange and Bradley Manning right now, and the willingness of American citizens to stand up and say, we stand with him, like the people who wear signs now saying, I am Bradley Manning. In my case, I wore a sign for television saying, I was Bradley Manning, very apt. And without that demonstration, you have a kind of isolation that makes it very difficult for anyone else to do anything that possibly supports the constitutional principles here. So there was a case when the Constitution worked. There was an independent judiciary. There was a Congress cutting off money for an illegal war. Eventually, there was the threat of impeachment, which was put in the Constitution, which, by the way, something George III was not subject to. You did have impeachment in Britain, but not for the monarch. And we do have it in this country when the monarch is violating the Constitution, violating the law. That's why it's there. Everything worked, and it made it possible to end a war. And it was a great tribute to the ability of our process to work. That's what I felt last night when I called my wife in the West Coast, having read Catherine Forrest's opinion, and said, I'm proud to be an American. This is a document now that expresses our highest ideals, and it's actually working. It's not just a columnist saying the way it should be. This is a man saying the representatives to the government that appointed me are mistaken in their reading of the law. They have, to paraphrase her, I'm definitely paraphrasing her, they have produced an argument that is worthy of communist China or of Stalinist Russia or of other countries, authoritarian countries I could name. It is not an American document. Now, the Circuit Court may not have that courage or that commitment. I hope the Supreme Court will when it goes to the Supreme Court. An interesting thing that I read, by the way, is that one justice on our side is Justice Scalia. I don't normally find myself on the same side as Justice Scalia, and I imagine that if he rules in our favor on this, as he may, because he has a sense of the Constitution and of the inability of the president to detain people without charges. I suppose that may lead to a rift with Clarence Thomas and some others, but I do hope that the Supreme Court will have a chance to uphold our constitutional framework, and that's worth living and dying for.
I want to turn to a clip from another whistleblower, William Binney, formerly of the National Security Agency, where he spent nearly 40 years, but retired about a month after September 11th, 2001, due to concerns over unchecked domestic surveillance.
After 9/11, all the wraps came off for NSA, and they decided to, between the White House and NSA and CIA, they decided to eliminate the protections of U.S. citizens and collect on domestically. So they started collecting from a commercial, the one commercial company that I know of that participated, provided over 300, well, probably on the average about 320 million records of communications of a U.S. citizen to a U.S. citizen inside this country.
What company?
AT&T. It was long-distance communications. So they were providing billing data. At that point, I knew I could not stay because it was a direct violation of the constitutional rights of everybody in the country. Plus, it violated the Pen Register Law and Stored Communications Act, the Electronic Privacy Act, the Intelligence Acts of 1947 and 1978. I mean, it was just a whole series of, plus all the laws covering federal communications governing telecoms. I mean, all those laws are being violated, including the Constitution, and that was a decision made that wasn't going to be reversed, so I could not stay there. I had to leave.
If they can't donate, at least they should read it.
Jacob Appelbaum, that was William Binney, National Security Agency whistleblower. Could you comment on what he said?
Yeah, I mean, essentially what William Binney is saying is that there's a warrantless wiretapping program. He was privy to this. He named individuals that are actually responsible for it. And as Ellsberg is saying, these types of things are impeachable offenses. And what Binney is saying is completely terrifying because the government is asserting different things, such as state secrecy and NSA v. Jewel. And we don't actually have a democratic process because we're not being told these things except by whistleblowers who are being targeted by the FBI. I mean, he had a gun pulled on his head in the shower. He has one leg. An FBI agent put a gun to his head.
William Binney is a diabetic amputee. His wife and his son were in the house. His wife and child were in the house.
He was in the shower when they arrived, and they put a gun to his head.
I mean, what is that? It's intimidation. And why is that? Because the FBI is complicit in impeachable offenses against the American people.
Jacob, you have said data retention is the beginning of the end of many of our freedoms in bulk, and that's a very scary thing.
That's absolutely the case. Data retention is what enables retroactive policing. I mean, what the NSA and other government agencies can do now, for example, with the Fort Hood incident, what we learned was that they already had everything on the person that they alleged did a shooting. And the reason is because they were proactively wiretapping and they simply dipped into their database, looked for matches of information, everything this person had done electronically, and they pulled it out. And they probably did this without a warrant. And this kind of retroactive policing is the stuff that the Stasi would dream of having, but they didn't have. And so now we have, in effect, a surveillance state the likes of which the world has never seen before.
We are talking to Jacob Appelbaum and Daniel Ellsberg, and we are asking you, please, to go to the phone. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report.